Hello students, this is Rajendra. Welcome to RK Biology classes. Today in this video, I'll be discussing some MCQs that might help you to take up some competitive exams to get into medical colleges. Before I get into the topic, I'll be discussing about the pattern. In each chapter, about 60 questions will be discussed in two parts. In each part, I'll be taking 30 questions and those questions will be discussed. After the class, if you are satisfied with the discussion, please click the like button and put your comments in the comment box. Your comments help me to continue my classes online. In today's class, I'll be discussing MCQs from chapter 4, Principles of Inheritance and Variation. In Principles of Inheritance and Variation, you have said about Mendelian principles, you have said about Morgan's experiment, the deviation from Mendelian principles, and later you have said about mutations and also genetic disorders. At the last, you have said about sex determination. I have taken few questions from these topics. I'll be discussing about these questions. So if you take the first question, the first question is mainly based on the words that has been used in genetics. If you take the words that has been used in genetics, the gene, that is one of the important word that is commonly used in genetics. Alleles, phenotype, genotype, homozygous, heterozygous, F1 generation, F2 generation. These are all the words that are used in genetics. So in this question, we have given that word and also we have given the definition. So what you are supposed to do in this question, you have to identify the right definition for these words and you have to identify the right answer. So the options have been given below. If you take the first one, phenotype, just now I told that you have said about certain words to understand genetics. So in that gene is one important word, but here I am not given that gene. But if let us take the first word, phenotype. You take any particular organism, or if you take in a pea plant, so the external appearance of a plant, how it looks. If you take the height of the plant, the plant can be dwarf as well as it can be tall. This will be the external appearance. If you take the shape of the seed can be round or the seed can be wrinkled. So how it appears, that's what we call it as phenotype. So here what they have given, external appearance of a character in an organism, it's a right definition for phenotype. But if you take the genotype, to understand genotype, you have to understand about the genes which control these characters. If you take the genes, genes are the part of chromosome that controls different characters. So each gene will control one character. If you take in pea plant, in each character there are two expressions. Such type of expressions, they are called contrasting characters or opposite traits. These contrasting characters are controlled by two genes. If the genes control the same character, then we call them as alleles. So alleles can be defined as the genes which control contrasting characters. In order to represent these alleles, so these two genes, they control the same character, that is height of the pea plant. But there are two expressions, they are called opposite traits or contrasting characters. If you take the genes which control tallness as well as dwarfness, these genes should be represented. In order to represent that, these two plants are allowed for cross-pollination. When they are allowed for cross-pollination, that is during cross-pollination, the pollen grains of one plant are collected, then it is transferred to the gynoecium of another plant. Then the seeds are produced, whatever the seeds that are produced, if they are allowed for germination. So in the next generation, what character will be obtained? In the next generation, you get tall plant. That means there will be a factor for dwarfness. That factor is nothing but gene. And there will be a gene for tallness. But here in the next generation, so this generation, what we call it as a first filial generation, and such type of crosses, we call them as genetic cross. After genetic cross, whatever the generation you get, that generation what we call it as first filial generation or F1 generation. This we call it as F1 generation. But here what character has been expressed? The gene for tallness has been expressed. That's why in order to represent this gene, we are going to take the first letter from tall. That is, we are going to write it as cap letter. According to Mendel, each character is controlled by two factors. So we are going to write it as capital T. And here dwarfness is not expressed in the F1 generation. Then dwarfness is considered as a recessive. So in order to represent the gene for recessive, we are going to write it as small t. So two factors are present for each character. Then we are going to write it as small t. If you take the factors that are present in this plant, that is in F1 generation, during formation of gametes, here all pollen grains contain capital T. Here the gynoecium or the ovule, they contain small t. When this pollen grain fertilizes the ovule containing small t, the seed contains capital T and small t. So then in the next generation there will be tall plant. That means capital T is expressed. Even this plant is tall. We are going to write it as capital, that is the genotype. If you write the genetic content of that plant for that character, that we call it as genotype. Appearance will be, we call it as phenotype. The appearance wise it is tall plant. But if you take the genotype, what alleles are present, that represents the genotype. If you take that the alleles, here whatever the alleles or the factors that are present, they are not identical. They are not identical. They are not identical. If the alleles are not identical, then that condition what we call it as homozygous. We call it as homozygous. So this condition is, it is homozygous. I'm sorry, it should be called as heterozygous. If they are non-identical or not identical, then we call it as heterozygous. Heterozygous. If the alleles are similar, then we call it as homozygous. Homozygous. Even this dwarf plant, similar alleles are present, then we call it as homozygous. So that means the term homozygous refers to the condition in which the alleles that are present, they are similar or identical alleles. If the alleles are identical, then we are supposed to call it as homozygous. But here what they have given, organism containing non-identical alleles for a character. If they contain non-identical alleles, then we call it as heterozygous. So that the second one, the word and definition is wrong. If you take the alleles, just now I told that the alleles are the genes which control contrasting characters. So if you take that the alleles, genes which code for different traits. If they code for different traits, we don't call them as alleles, we call them as genes. If the genes code for the contrasting characters or opposite trait, then we are going to call them as alleles. The best example will be the capital T and small t. These are the alleles. Capital R, small r. That is, capital R is for round seed and small r is for wrinkle seed. If the alleles are dissimilar, then we call it as heterozygous. If they are similar, then we call them as homozygous. And these are the genes, capital T and small t are the genes which control contrasting character. Then these two are called alleles. So that here what they have given us, they control, they code for different trait. It is a wrong statement. They control the opposite trait. If you take the filial 1 progeny, this what we call it as genetic cross. After genetic cross, whatever the generation you get, we call it as F1 generation. If this plants of F1 generation, if they are allowed for cell pollination or cross pollination, whatever the pollen grains that are released, they are allowed to enter into the gynoecium of same flower. That we call it as cell pollination. Then later there will be formation of seeds. So this will be the fruit. Then if these seeds are allowed for germination, you get the next generation. In the next generation, in this monohybrid cross, you get 3 tall plants. 3 tall plants that you have studied in this chapter, and one will be the dwarf plant. So whatever the generation you get after the genetic cross in F1 hybrid, then this we call it as F2 generation. After genetic cross, first hybrid generation we call it as F1 generation. Then the second hybrid generation we should call it as F2. generation. So here filial 1 progeny or F1 generation. It is plants that are produced after genetic cross, it is correct. Represent second hybrid generation. If it represents second hybrid generation, then we are going to write it as filial 2 progeny. That's why even this one is wrong. If we take the fifth one, dominant, to which factor we call it as dominant? When two dissimilar alleles come together, it can be capital R, small r, or capital T, small t. When two dissimilar alleles come together, whichever the factor that is expressed, that is considered as a dominant. If the similar alleles come together, then we cannot say which is dominant and which is recessive. If small t come together, then you cannot say which is dominant and which is recessive. You can say which is recessive and which is dominant only if the two dissimilar alleles come together. So dominant, the factor that is expresses when a pair of similar alleles, it is not similar alleles, it should be dissimilar alleles come together. So that even that word as well as the definition is wrong. That means in these four words, the proper definition is found in only in the first one. That is, the answer should be B. Only one is correct. So let us go to the second question. So this question is mainly based on the alleles as well as the multiple alleles. If we take that the question, capital T and small t are the alleles, just now we have discussed that, of a gene that controls height in garden P. But if you take IA, IB and IO, even these are alleles. These alleles control blood group. So if you take the IA, if you take IA, IB and IO or small letter I, these three alleles control the blood groups. According to Mendel's principle, only two alleles should control a character, but there are certain deviation from Mendelian principle. You find certain characters which are not controlled by two alleles, they are controlled by more than two alleles. If they are controlled by more than two alleles, then such type of alleles are called multiple alleles. They are called multiple alleles. If they are multiple alleles, they should occupy the homologous chromosomes, homologous sites of homologous chromosome. So all human beings are diploid. That means you find 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each chromosome is present in pairs. Three alleles are present. The region where the alleles are present, that region what we call it as locus. Locus will be the singular form. Locus. Loci is plural. So this is the region where the genes are present. But there are three alleles. Then these three alleles should occupy two positions. In what combination they can come together? That is, IA can come with IA. The another possibility, IA can come with IO. The another one is IB can come with IB. Then the another one is IB can come with IO. IA can also come with IB. Then IO can come together. So the number of genotypes that are possible if three alleles are present. If two alleles are present, capital T, small t are the two alleles. How many genotypes are possible? Capital T can come together. Capital T, small t can come together. Small t come together. The number of genotypes that are possible will be three. Three genotypes. The phenotype will be two. One will be the tall and another one will be dwarf. But here if you take the number of genotype, 6 genotypes are possible. 6 genotype. If you take the blood group, how many phenotypes are present? If you take blood groups, 4 phenotypes. Blood groups, 4 phenotypes. Four phenotypes. The number of genotype will be 6, 4 phenotypes. And number of alleles, how many alleles are there? There are 3 alleles. 3 alleles. Among these 3 alleles, IA as well as IB are dominant, IO is recessive. IA and IB are equally dominant. When they come together, the blood group will be AB blood group. That phenomenon what we call it as codominance. Now coming to this, the question, If you take all these three alleles, they should occupy the same loci on homologous chromosome, whether it might be the height of the pea plant or it might be the blood group. If you take the first statement, same chromosome, they cannot be present on same chromosome or different loci. Different loci means this is one locus and this is another locus. If they are present on different loci, then we don't call them as alleles, we call them as genes. That's why the first one is wrong. Any chromosome at the same loci, if you take another chromosome, this might be the another chromosome. If the genes are present on this, and this gene cannot be the alleles, they should be the genes itself. So even the second one is wrong. If you take the third one, structurally functionally similar chromosomes are called homologous chromosomes. So one come from ova, the another one come from sperm. Such similar chromosomes, we call them as homologous chromosomes. The allele should be present on the homologous sites of homologous chromosomes. So the third one, homologous chromosomes at same loci, it is correct. Any two alleles should occupy this loci. Then a character is expressed. The chromosome that come from sperm, that is called paternal. The chromosome that come from ova, it is called maternal chromosome. Such chromosomes are called homologous chromosomes. So if you take the fourth one, non-homologous chromosome, if they are present on non-homologous chromosome, we don't call them as alleles. So even this one is wrong. So the right one will be the C. Let us go to the third question. If you take the third question, Mendel's law. So if you take the Mendel's law, in your class you have studied about the three laws of Mendel. They are called principles of inheritance. The first one is law of dominance, the second one is law of segregation, and the third one is law of independent assortment. If you want to apply Mendel's law, you have to conduct that genetic cross. So the plant should be pure breeding, pure line plants, to which we call them as pure line plants. The plants that can exhibit cell pollination and produce the same plants in the next generation or for many generations, they are called pure line plants. If you take a tall plant, then if you take the genotype, it will be capital T, capital T. If this plant is allowed for cell pollination, if it is allowed for cell pollination, the pollen grains are collected and are released into the gynoecium of same flower, that we call it as cell pollination. The pea plants exhibit cell pollination naturally. Then what are the seeds that are produced? If you are going to allow these seeds to germinate, even in the next generation, you get only tall plants. Then such type of plants, we call them as pure line plants. You take dwarf plant, if you allow them to undergo cell pollination, even in the next generation, you get dwarf plant. You take a pea plant containing round seed, if you allow that pea plant to undergo cell pollination, even in the next generation, the pea plants will produce the round seed. But when these two plants, that is when a tall plant and a dwarf plant, if it is allowed for cross pollination, so if you, for example, this will be the tall plant and this will be the dwarf plant. If these two are allowed for cross pollination in the next generation, you get tall plant. If you take the genotype, this will be capital T, this will be small t, and this plant will be having capital T, small t. This plant, homozygous plant, it is pure line plant. But even this plant is a tall plant. But if you conduct a cell pollination, you will not get only tall plant, you get both tall plant and dwarf plant. Then this plant is not a pure line plant. You can understand the law of dominance only if the plants are pure line. When capital T, small t come together, then you can say that the tallness is dominant and dwarfness is recessive. So you can apply Mendel's law only when the parental plants are pure line or pure breeding plants. If you take the first one, F1 hybrid, in this F1 hybrid, you have to get only one type of plant. If you get only one type of plant, only one parental character is expressed. The character that has been expressed in this generation, F1 generation, that we call it as dominant. which is not expressed, that we call it as recessive. In case if these two plants are allowed for cross pollination, and if you get two types of plants, one might be the dwarf plant and another might be tall plant, then you cannot apply law of dominance. That's why the first one is wrong. If you take the next one, the characters are linked. When we call them as linked characters, the gene for these characters, if they are present on same chromosome at different loci. For example, capital R is for round seed and capital Y is for yellow seed. If these genes are present on the same chromosome, then we call them as linked genes. On this chromosome, there might be a small r, here there might be small y. If the genes are present, if the genes for different characters present on the same chromosome, such genes are called linked genes. These are called linked genes. If they are linked genes, during formation of gametes, only two types of gametes are formed because the genes are present on the same chromosome. Two types of gametes. That means capital R, small r should come with small y, capital R should come with capital Y. Capital R cannot come with small y because they are present on different chromosome. If the genes are linked, then you cannot apply law of independent assortment. So you cannot apply Mendel's law. Then if you take the fourth one, first pair of contrasting character is dependent. These two are dependent on the second pair of character, that is capital R, small r are dependent on capital Y, small y. Mendel says that the first pair of factor are not dependent on second pair of factor. That's why the four types of gametes are formed. Capital R can come with capital Y, capital R can come with small y, small r can come with capital Y, small r can come with small y. It is because all these factors are present on different chromosome. So capital R and small r are present on one pair of homologous chromosome. The another one is capital Y, small y are present on another pair of homologous chromosome. So that you can apply law of independent assortment. Capital R can come with capital Y, capital R can also come with small y. Small r can come with capital Y, small r can also come with small y. When the genes are present on different chromosome, then you can apply law of independent assortment. That means the first pair of factor, they are completely independent of second pair of factor. That is what we call it as law of independent assortment. Then only you can apply Mendel's law. So here they are saying that first pair of contrasting character is dependent. If they are dependent, you cannot apply Mendel's law. So even this statement is wrong. So the right answer will be C. Coming to the next question. Which of the following is not the character of garden pea? Some information related to garden pea plant. Garden pea plant, it has a scientific name. The scientific name, it has Pisum sativum. Pisum sativum. It belongs to family Fabaceae. Belongs to family Fabaceae. It is a plant that completes its life cycle within 1 year. Then the plants are annual. They are called annual. Then if you take the diploid, the chromosome, the chromosomal number, diploid set, it is 14. There are 7 pairs of homologous chromosomes. 7 pairs of homologous chromosomes. So the chromosomal number will be 14. So these are some information related to garden pea plant. It is easily available. But here the question is mainly based on this concept. Which of the following is not the character of garden pea plant? Garden pea plant naturally exhibit cell pollination. I hope you know about cell pollination. This is the tall plant or the garden pea plant. It will be having the flower. So this represents the flower. If the pollen grains that are collected here, if they are allowed to enter into the same gynoecium, then we call it as cell pollination. So it naturally exhibits cell pollination, but here what they have given us, exhibit cross pollination naturally. That's why the first one is wrong. But even though they exhibit cross cell pollination, you can bring about cross pollination easily. You can bring about that artificial hybridization. Meaning of artificial hybridization, you collect the pollen grains from this plant and allow the pollen grains to enter into the gynoecium of this plant. That we call it as artificial hybridization. During artificial hybridization, before transferring the pollen grains, in this plant you are going to remove the stamens. The removal of stamens, what we call it as emasculation. It is called emasculation. Anywhere you can bring about cross-pollination, but naturally exhibit cell pollination. So the second statement is correct. Second statement, it has cross-pollination can be easily conducted. Then if you take the genetic cross, if you conduct genetic cross, in the next generation you get the F1 generation. What are the plants that are obtained in next generation, that is in F1 generation, you can bring about cell pollination as well as cross-pollination. That means these plants are fertile and they produce the seeds. So even the third statement is correct. Hybrids are fertile. This we call it as hybrid. That is produced only after genetic cross. These pea plants, they have shorter lifespan. It is correct. Produce a large number of seeds and progeny within a short period. Even it is correct. They complete their life cycle within 1 year. That's why we call them as annual. So the right answer, the wrong statement here is the first one. The first one is the answer. It is they are asking about the wrong statement. That's why the first one is the answer. Let us go to the next question, fifth one. When two alleles are brought together in a hybrid, one of them expresses itself completely at the expense of second. It is due to Mendel's which law? So if you take that genetic cross, if you take the genetic cross, a tall plant, capital T, the small t, or you can take the plant which is having a round seed as well as a wrinkle seed. A round seed, it is dominant, that's why we are going to write it as capital R. Wrinkle seed is recessive, then we are going to write it as small r. After crossing these two plants, capital T, small t come together. Before, in this plant, the gametes are produced, all the gametes contain capital T. Here the gametes are produced, all gametes contain small t. When they come together, one factor will be expressed in the presence of another factor. Then that law, what we call it as law of dominance. So the answer should be law of dominance. But we have given law of segregation as well as law of purity of gametes. If we take this plant, that is the F1 generation, if this plant is allowed for cell pollination, so this will be the tall plant, but this tall plant will be having capital T and small t. It is having capital T and small t. When it produces the pollen grains, the pollen grains that are produced, 50% of the pollen grains contain capital T, 50% with small t. Even the gynoecium, the ovules, 50% ovules contain capital T, 50% with small t. What are the gametes that are produced in this pure line plant? That is, the tall plant produces gametes with capital T. Even the heterozygous plant, when it produces gametes, 50% of the gametes will be having capital T. 50% will be having small t. This capital T, the gamete with capital T is exactly similar to the gamete produced in this homozygous plant. That means the purity of gamete is maintained. That capital T, even though it is present with small t, will not undergo contamination. They are not contaminated, there is no blending. There is no blending, they separate without blending, then we call it as law of segregation. But if you take the gametes, they are exactly similar to the gametes that are produced in homozygous plants. That's why law of segregation is also called law of purity of gametes. So even in this plant, there will be the gamete containing capital T. Even though it is heterozygous plant, you find gamete, 50% of the gametes containing capital T. Purity of gametes have been maintained. That's why law of segregation is also called law of purity of gametes. Then law of independent assortment. I've already discussed that. The one pair of factor, the segregate without depending on the another pair of factor, that we call it as law of independent assortment. Law of independent assortment is based on dihybrid cross. Then if you take the law of segregation as well as law of dominance, these two are based on monohybrid cross, single gene inheritance. Monohybrid cross. So the right answer will be D. So I'll go to the sixth question. So that I'll continue in the next class. If you are satisfied with this discussion, please click the like button and put your comments in the comments box so that I can continue the discussion in the next class. Thank you.